We are talking about absolute value equations and inequalities, and we want to evaluate expressions involving the absolute value, solve absolute value equations, and solve absolute value inequalities. So we got a definition. The absolute value of a number is the distance from zero on the number line. Since distance is non-negative, the absolute value of a number is always positive. So here we have the absolute value of x could not equal negative a. So we can put a circle around that and cross that out. But the absolute value of x could equal a, or it could equal 0. So we have some examples. If we said the absolute value of negative 2, that is equal to 2. And the absolute value of 0 is equal to 0. And the absolute value of 2 is equal to also 2. So that's why when we end up solving, if we have an absolute value of x, the number inside the absolute value, we have to count for both positive and negative. Could be positive or it could be negative. So we have some steps to solve absolute value equations. First, we want to get the absolute value by itself. And like we have before, we're going to use GEMDES in order to do this. So we're going to start with subtraction and work our way to groups. Use the absolute value equation. Set the absolute value equation equal to the positive and the negative version of the number. And that's what we have to account for here. That's when we account for the positive and the negative version, because we could have a negative 2x, but overall, when we took the absolute value, it would be positive 2. So we have to account that inside the absolute value could be a negative or it could be a positive. And then, again, use GEMDES to solve for the variable. A few things we have to remember when we're solving absolute value equations. So the absolute value of an expression is equal to c. It could be equal to c or it could be equal to negative c. Because if we take the absolute value, that will make that positive c, but the absolute value of negative c is also c. So we have to make sure that we check for both of those versions. If it's less than or equal to, we have to remember that it's an and. So it has to be between the negative version and the positive version of whatever the answer is. So one thing that can help us remember is if we say less than, and we change the way of that spelling to remind us that it should be and we have to solve that way. Another thing that we can keep in mind, if it's greater than, we can say great or than. So those are some ways that we can remember if it's and or, and if it's or, we have to solve it two separate ways. Once where we leave the expression alone both ways, but one time we leave the sign and leave the answer as positive, and then another time we change the direction of the sign and make the answer negative. That's because if we were like multiplying both sides by negative, we always change the direction of the sign.